But with that, why don't we get started and they can join if they are able. So for anyone watching from the public, my name is Benjamin Mann. I am the treasurer of the Maine Recovery Council, and this is, I believe, the third meeting of the Finance Committee of the Maine Recovery Council. We have a public agenda that's posted on, or an agenda that's posted on the website for the Maine Recovery Council, and we will run through that today. I think just as a reminder, the meeting's obviously public and we're recording it so folks can listen in after. Can I get a volunteer for just taking notes for the meeting today?
I'm all set. Got my pen already.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. So with that, we could do a quick budget update. I don't see Mark Toulouse, but who's the budget director for the Office of the Attorney General. He might be joining as well. But there hasn't been any change in the status of payments received for settlements for the Maine Recovery Council. Our balance remains at $17.2 million. According to the spreadsheets online, though, we should be receiving the rest of the $14.5 million that we would otherwise be planning to receive this calendar year, which would bring it up to 28 million. But I do understand from Brendan, I think that those are likely to be received early next year. Do you have additional updates on that, Brendan?
Not other than we're told that, or it's my understanding that the 5 new settlements will make their first payments before the end of this fiscal year, but sometime in 2024. And I don't have further information than that. Ben, I do have one further update about the spreadsheets.
Okay. Courtney, did you have a question that's relevant to that discussion first?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question. Did you say we have 17 million currently and 14 million on the way? Because that would be 31 million.
We've received 2.9 million this year, which is the 2.9 million of the 14.5 or so. So we're slated. We received 14 and change last year, and we should receive 14 this year for a total of 28. We've received part of the 14 million, which is why
I got it.
Those numbers didn't tick and tie exactly.
Thank you.
Brendan? Sorry, Pat.
And Ben, I have a quick question. That money, the schools, 2-3%, is it 2 or 3%? Is that included in this? And if any of that money been distributed to the schools?
The 3% set aside for schools, my understanding is included in those numbers that we just reviewed, the 17 and the 3% overall from what the total settlement is for the Maine Recovery Council allocation. And nothing has been distributed to the schools yet.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on Pat's question? Okay. Can somebody help me understand the 3% of the school funding that needs to be set aside? Is it that we are a pass-through agent to the schools, or are we the authority to deem what those money should be allocated to for the schools? I guess, are we just a pass-through, or are we the deciders?
That's a great question. I have the same question. Brendan, can you
Yep.
provide a little more light on that?
I'll give an answer, and if it's not answering the question, just ask it again or differently. The council's responsibility is to administer the grant program for the 3% for the schools. That grant program is described in the school's MOU. So it's not quite that the council is just a pass-through. It actually has work to do to administer a grant program. It's just that the population that can apply to that particular grant program is restricted to school districts in Maine. And the uses are further restricted to, generally speaking, the special education related opioid use, or rather, opioid abatement activities described in the school's MOU.
Do we have a copy of the school's MOU available to us?
Yes.
Okay,
You got it, Courtney, as part of the original packet of the council's documents.
okay, so
And it's on the website.
maybe it's kind of both and then, so we're bound to spend the money on a subset of activities for schools. But we're the deciders of what that looks like.
Yeah, yes, and the MOU further requires that the council engage with an expert in special education matters selected by the school districts in Maine that litigated.
Okay, so maybe this is a Pat question. I don't know, Pat, is there a need for another committee based solely on school funding, that we appoint a expert to be on the committee with other committee members from the Maine Recovery Council? Because I feel like it's like a totally different thing than the thing that either the budget committee or the grant, maybe the grant committee.
I think at this point, let me talk it over with Mary and see what we can do. I think the grant and program committee has enough on their plate. Trying to figure out how to get the larger portion of the fundings out where it needs to be. This just adds to their burden. So let me have a conversation with Mary and maybe Brendan, and let's see what we can do about a separate subcommittee about moving that, because it's the same but different. And so let's pull it out of the grants committee, which again, they're on a momentum, but my understanding is part of the grants committee is they're contemplating making a request to help schools, but the request for the prevention piece this money can't be used for, because it has to be used for special ed. Am I correct with that, Brendan?
Yeah, the 3% is earmarked for the schools and for their use on abatement special ed purposes. That said, schools can apply to the council for its other funding opportunities, separately.
Correct.
So if the council makes available funding for prevention or for, whatever other activities, so long as the council, wants to make that available to schools can apply for that also.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think, and then I'll let Ben take his meeting, and I know Todd is standing up. I think what I'll do is I will meet with Mary, and Mary and I will have a conversation, and maybe we'll pull in Brendan with that, and maybe even Dr. Johnson, and come up with another sort of committee to deal with that. Because again, I think the grants committee has enough on their plate, so we'll explore that further.
Did you have a point to make?
I didn't have a point, but I have a question. And maybe it's not appropriate here, but from the programs grant committee there was some talk about bar, for example, right? And what we didn't learn, and maybe we could find out through this process is there a component of bar that's specific to special? I suspect there is. So that may be important.
I might, Pat, if it makes sense, I don't know if we want to jump straight to governance and setting up a new committee or not. That might be warranted or not. I think maybe just a summary of what our requirements and or responsibilities with this funding. I've been thinking of it, and Brendan, correct me, it sounds like it's more nuanced than this, but I was thinking of this as being all of the council funding needs to be aligned to the allowable uses, which is that 6-7 page appendix document. And that the 3% set aside was particular to who the money was going to, which was school districts. But it sounds like it is, as opposed to the rest of the funding, which it could be providers, it could be individuals, it could be a mix, it could be whatever, whomever we thought was to best used, served by it. But it sounds like it's more nuanced than just the school districts receiving the funding because, or maybe it's not, I don't know, and we just need to consult with someone about special need, but I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head how abatement vis-a-vis prevention would be, how there might be some overlap of that, there might be some non-overlapping pieces.
Again, Ben, I think I'm gonna answer your question, but if I don't, just say it differently or ask it again. But I think, I mean, the school district's program, you know, also has to fit within the abatement activities as described in the MOU. Haley, you know, everyone can see that, right?
No, they can't.
The public?
No, they can't. They just see you. They see this.
The school district's program, the special education program activities have to fit within the abatement activities of the MOU generally, and then it's sort of a subset of those activities focused on special education. And the MOU, you know, provides a little bit more guidance, just a bit more specifics about those kinds of activities. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Haley, Miles is in the waiting room.
I will upgrade him.
So, and I don't want to get too off track, but Mary, why do I think you and Liz met with the Commissioner of Education?
Oh, Liz and I did meet, yes, with Betsy and Paige earlier this week before the Grants and Programs Committee to discuss their requests specifically for bar funding from the council.
For the bar funding. All right. So what I think I'll do is we will investigate this further, and then I will make a recommendation to the committee as to whether we have another subcommittee or whether we, let me just talk to a few people and then I'll get back to everybody.
Just the last thing I have on this is, Ben, as you're like drafting up draft budgets for us, could you just add a line that tells us how much has to go to the 3% each year?
I plan on,
In general?
I plan on sharing my screen with the budget examples that we've been working on, and I actually did that for this meeting. So it's already, there's a row in there that
And
deducts
this
it
is why you're the treasurer, Ben.
Courtney, just to point out that the larger spreadsheet also has a column for that 3% set aside, so you can find it on there also, which is, you know, which will be different from Ben's budget.
Thank you.
Just a friendly amendment. I'll go with our budget. So let's put a pin. We'll circle back around to how we need to distribute and any other special considerations for the school set aside. But I think that is a good conversation and a follow-up to have on that. It's a small piece, but it is material to the overall funding. So I think if there's not anything else on that topic, we can go to the main gist of the meeting today, which is establishing an annual budget.
Hey, Ben.
Go ahead. Oh, do you have something else on spreadsheets? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a very minor, well, just an update about funding from one of the sources, Mallinckrodt. Mallinckrodt, the amount of money that's going to come into Maine has been reduced by a second bankruptcy. Mallinckrodt's expected original payment was $5.8 million over a series of years. The second bankruptcy has reduced that to $1.783 million. And at some point, we'll be posting an updated spreadsheet with that and other updates. But just wanted to flag that reduction.
And that was 5.4 million down to 1.8 million.
It was 5.8 down to 1.783. Yeah, and that will all come in. That will all come in. My expectation is entirely in 2024.
This might be like a policy ad lib that no one needs to respond to, but I feel like I just need to say it. Like, how many times can these companies go into bankruptcy, and is this gonna keep happening? And like, I
And
don't
they
know.
just open up, and they'll just open up another company under a different name, and the bankruptcy won't follow them. That is how that works.
And there's some money that hasn't even been settled yet. We know that. So it'll be changing. Hopefully not a whole lot, but it'll be changing.
This is my face about the fact that Purdue Pharma and others continue to get away with murder.
So that will, I mean, if that's a $4 million reduction and it's all happening in fiscal 24, that it directly influences our work today, what we're going to do over the next hour. So I think we should just take that into consideration, and what we probably, I think we, I can't do this on the fly, but I think we just might have to try to if we're going to have to factor that in afterward, we'll have to do that. I also will just point out, and I'd like to follow up with Brendan on this. I think if not for our work on the first year budget, but the timing of the payments will be consequential to the funding going out. So I was expecting the payments to come in by the end of the calendar year. It sounds like they're getting pushed to the right slightly. It shouldn't affect, we have enough money in our account now to do the work that we're going to do in year one, but year 2 and 3, it would be influenced by the timing of that. And we don't want a gap in services if we're funding things on an ongoing basis. So we'll just need to take that into account. Again, that's not for today. It's just for a consideration of making sure that services are not interrupted for things that we want to continue to provide ongoing funding for. Todd, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just trying to refresh my memory about the 5.8 million originally expected from Malincroft. Was that all anticipated in 2024? Oh, I thought that was spread over a period of time.
You're right, Todd. That was expected over a period of time. The second bankruptcy both reduced the amount and turned it into basically a one-time payment.
So my question, I think, remains is that if the one-time payment is going to all come in 2024, it may actually be more than we were originally anticipating.
Yes, sorry, I misinterpreted what Brendan said. I thought the 5.8 was coming in 24, but if the 5.8 was going to be spread out over a series of years, and now it's been reduced to 1.8, but front loaded into 2024, we might have more funding in the near term and less funding in the out years. So that is a different dynamic we will have to account for. And
I mean, I imagine you're all understanding this, but when I say 1.8, that's the 100% that'll come into Maine, of which the council will get 50%.
So that is significantly less.
But front loaded.
It's all proportional.
More in the
So
first, but not.
Yeah, Pat, you know, the 5.8, the council was going to get 50% of that, just spread out over several years. And now it's not 5.8, it's 1.8, and it's just in 1 year. But under any scenario, the council would only get 50, the council would get 50%.
anything else on sort of the budget update front before we move along to more transactional nature of coming up with a recommendation to the council? Okay, thank you for that conversation. What I think Paul suggested, and it was a good suggestion at the last council meeting, that this committee make a formal recommendation to the full council on a budget. And I think what makes sense for today is to develop that. I would focus, I think the most important thing is the first year budget, so that we are operating within a number for what we are comfortable pushing out in year one. That will necessitate as well, though, coming up with some out year. We don't need to, I think it makes sense to possibly go all the way out to 18 years, but I think it can just, I was using the the term outline in my head. I think we can come up with an outline of how we want the funds and focus on the first year though. And this will probably, I think, or might be adjusted in the future. And there's different ways of doing it, but I think that is a good way to use the balance of this hour to come up with that first year budget and outline for the out years. I will say that I think it makes sense, and I welcome feedback on this, to do this independent from the recommendations of the grants and program team, just looking at the dollars, and then we can align them after the fact. And that's why I say that we might want to adjust the numbers after the fact, because you know, budgets force trade-offs, and trade-offs are hard, and you know, and priorities are just another word for trade-offs. So I think, but I think just looking at the cash flow and how much funding we have makes sense to develop the budget, and then after the fact, aligning it to, we want to put it towards this purpose 1, 2, 3, and 4, and everything after the fact. Does that make sense to folks, or does anyone else have a amendment to that approach? Great. Okay, so I will share the budget spreadsheet again, and I actually, so we can sort of do this live in real time. I can play around with the numbers. I think we've had a couple discussions about this at last council meeting and at the prior finance committee meeting. And I think we have a general consensus on how much we were looking at. So we have a starting place to work from, but I can adjust numbers and we can play around with it on the spreadsheet so that because it's just hard to discuss numbers. It's much easier to look at something. Haley, I'm going to need host or screen sharing ability, please. Perfect.
I'm gonna make you a co-host.
So I just to orient you to this spreadsheet with lots of numbers again, it is we have the estimated in the year 1 to 18, the calendar years, the estimated payments coming in on row 4 here. It sounds like there will be some changes, like some of this 14 million will be coming in on year 3 in 2024, and some of this, and there might be an increase to this 5.6 million based on the reduction in the front loading to the Mellencroft settlement. We have the running total here. You can see the 3% school set aside. I just did 3% of row 4. So you can see it's about 850,000, I think. No, it's a little over $1 million for the first 3 years for the school set aside. I did not deduct that amount from the examples here because it may all be part of the same prioritization that we're gonna be doing to get the money out. We have examples A, and you know, I just this was a straight line of $7 million ongoing with one-time funding up front in example A. Example B, just to remind you, was all ongoing funding at a higher amount. And I think the general consensus that I was referring to before was something along the lines of C and D, which I dubbed taper ongoing funding, front load one time for example C. And then example D was also taper ongoing funding, but spread out the one-time funding. I did earlier today, make another example that we can play around with that sort of I thought is what I heard from folks in our discussions previously that might make sense to start working off of. All of this, I know you can't see it, but it all ties to the total amount. It all runs down to 0 after the final year. Are there any other questions or clarifications or observations that folks wanted to make about how much thoughts on the budget overall, the first year funding, the difference between one-time or ongoing. I think I'll just add, I have this footnote at the bottom, any administrative costs. So if we're going to hire, and I think we likely will at some point hire an organization to help do grant making and everything, it would come out of these costs as well. So we should just take that into account. And that could be, just guessing, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think, potentially. But TBD on that front. Courtney?
I just wanted to say that I really like example X. I think it's a very thoughtful example. I think it tapers dependency on the Maine Recovery Council over time. And I have no edits to it. I think you did a great job, Ben.
Great, thanks for that. Other thoughts?
Ben, I have a question. In the MOU or in the piece, there's a percentage cap for admin. I don't have that off the top of my head. Do you know what that is?
I don't, but I see Brendan reaching for a binder.
I want to say it's 3%. Am I right?
I don't think so.
No?
I'm not sure that Pat, I'm not sure there's a cap in the MOU for.
Is it in the statute?
No, there's a cap in the settlements themselves that say,
Oh, okay.
you know, say the distributors, or let's say like J&J, just to keep it simple, you know, something like 85, in general, something like 85% of the money has to be used on abatement. And so no more than 15% can be used for things like administration. Whether the council, like, I think the settlement is using the word administration in a different way than, like, you know, hiring an organization to help with the grant funding. I mean, I can look into it further, but I don't think there's a cap in the MOU on how much the council can spend on getting its work done.
Okay.
And, you know, if somebody else finds it, please point it out to me, because it could be just I forgot about it.
I just remembered seeing it somewhere, and I don't remember the details, but I'm old.
I think I remember like the advocates arguing for it, and maybe it didn't end up in the actual legislation, though I would argue that there should be some baseline of a group norm or in the something that says that we shouldn't spend, not that I think we would, 50% of the money on administrative.
Just as a reference point, I mean, this is not from my professional life, but I think, you know, typically nonprofits, Pat, you might have thoughts on this as well. On I think 10% for overhead is a benchmark, and I actually think that was raised to 15% at some point. I think 10% was pretty lean administrative and overhead funding for a nonprofit, for example. But that is sort of between that 10 and 15%. I'm not suggesting that we spend. That would be 17 to 28 million or 26 million-ish over the 18 years. That would be a lot. I don't think we're going to approach that, but just as a reference point. Paul, you've had your hand up.
I want to reiterate what Courtney said and agree with example X. One of the things when I went to the meeting in Boston, several of the states said how important it was for them to have money available for emergencies or one-time type spending, and they felt that really gave them flexibility.
Thanks for that. It's always nice to hear comparisons to what others are doing, just as a reference point. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't have a ability to raise the virtual hand. Just sticking with the issue of administrative expenses, and maybe this is more appropriate for the Program and Grants Committee, but Paul's comment reminded me that in listening to discussions of folks who administer these funds in other states, they've had, people have talked about the issue of administrative costs of the grantees. So for example, does the council want to pay for what I guess is called soft costs or things like that? You all, a number of you on the council have a lot more experience with these kinds of questions as grantees. And so I just want to flag, there's an issue of the council's expenses, and then there's the issue of the grantees' expenses and what the council's budget is funding.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this funding, budgets never spend to the penny, right? So these would be up to amounts, and that's something that I think a lot about in my day-to-day job, right? So we wouldn't, unless we approved it, we would not spend more than the figures here in each year, or we're focusing on the first year here in particular, but there would likely be some underspend, I think, and then we would just shift funding availability to the right and possibly be able to fund additional programs, or there's a delay on contracts or something like that would otherwise move funding out to the out years a little bit more. Todd? I'm sorry, it doesn't look like you're on mute, but we can't hear you, or I can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that's my computer. I have to keep switching microphones. I think it's probably because I have two screens. I don't know. I apologize.
Okay.
I wonder if Dr. Vinsel had garnered any history from the other states around how long. In other words, do we need 10 or 15 years worth of short-term funding? I mean, I don't disagree with anything. I like X or recommendation to council. I could get behind D if there wasn't a gap in between and short-term funding was maybe spread over 5 years.
We lost you again, Todd.
Of course you did. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'll keep bouncing. I apologize. I don't know where I cut off, so.
5 years.
You could get
Yeah.
behind D if there wasn't a gap in the funding in those every other year categories.
Yeah, I mean, and it gives us a little bit more money in the long run. But I'm with you where you're going. I just wonder how long we're going to need, or what the urgent matter, requirements might be for one-time or short-term funding in the longer term. I don't know. Probably nobody does.
Yeah, the other states did not, talk about how long their short-term funding was going to be carrying through.
Pat, did you have something?
A couple things. One is I also agree with the recommendation, the one that's now labeled recommendation to council. That's the budget spreadsheet that for me personally, I like. To answer sort of Brendan a little bit, I would hate at this point to determine, I think it depends on the grant, whether you spend the money on bricks and mortar or spend it on administrative costs. And I always use the example of Barn. Barn could find plenty of grants for bricks and mortar. And for doing this, they couldn't find any to supplant an admin cost. So they were growing leaps and bounds, needed an executive director, and couldn't find any grants that would support administrative expenses until the state awarded them a contract. So I would hate as a committee to limit things. I think as we filter through what our priorities are and put the grants, we may put some restrictions on those. But again, some people will want bricks and mortar money. some people will want admin. I think, we have to be flexible for the need, per program. But yeah, I think that was what I had to say, but I do like the recommendation, the one that you have labeled now, recommendation to council. That's the one I like the best.
Thanks, Pat. Courtney?
Just on the thread of like what type of funding, I think I definitely agree with Pat on a lot of what she just said. I would just also raise that, especially in relation to like the grassroots or smaller organizations run by folks who are directly impacted, that I would advocate for general operating funds to help them really just do the work that they're already doing and trusting the folks who are doing this work to do it well. And just general operating funds. I mean, I'm at a MeHalf conference right now. I've been here for 3 days. They got a $2 million grant gift from what is Benzo's wife gave
Mackenzie.
9 million. Mackenzie, yeah. And they've been having, directly impacted folks here for the last 3 days, really like planning what this is going to look like and what do we need investments in. And one of the biggest calls was just like, let us do the work, like give us general funding and let us do the work. And I don't know like the legality around that. And maybe I'd look to Brendan. Of course, they're going to have to tell us what they did and give us outcomes and measure metrics and whatnot. But the less strings, the better, especially in relations to grassroots, directly impacted led organizations.
Yeah, totally agree, Courtney. And the other piece is, again, giving them some leeway. I'm not a big supporter of a 1-year grant, particularly for them. They have to plan out that you get a 2 or 3 year at least grant for them so they can be able to do the work. It's too short for some of these small organizations to get just a one-time. Now, there may be something that is a one-time. Somebody may be requesting, I need to buy a house, and you do that. But for the most part, I think at least 2 or 3 years for some of these smaller companies to be able to depend on that money for at least a couple of years, I think you'll see a bigger impact. And they have to have some flexibility.
That all makes sense to me. I would just, the distinction that I draw in my head from both what Pat and Courtney said, I would label those funds like in the capacity building category, just to put a name on it. I will, most of, a lot of the contract, almost all of the contracts that DHHS does, for example, is, has specific deliverables, like you're administering, a service or something. So capacity building is a pretty different construct, and I think it would require, and it's the need is clear, I think, based on the last during the council meetings and public forum and everything. So we just need to think through that, because I think reporting and making sure that the funds are appropriately used and deployed in an efficient manner it's harder to track funds for capacity building, as opposed to I increased beds over here, or we have more shelter beds over there, or we funded a media campaign or whatever it is. Just something to keep in mind. But this is sort of like the next agenda item, right? Aligning priorities with the budget, which is, I think what is immediately going to happen after we sort of have this recommendation in the council. I'll just highlight a few other things just to stress test this recommendation. I considered going down to 8 million in year 1 and year 2. It was between 8 and 10 million in my head, just because we're going to fund 4 pillars, and I wanted it to be divisible by 4 evenly instead of 9, for example. I will, but I think it does taper pretty quickly in year 3 to 9 million. So, for example, if we're talking about capacity building and funding up, making grants available up to 10%, say, I'm just throwing out examples here, of your total operating budget up to X amount, that might have to be tapered in year 3, for example, and facilities, I think, would become quickly reliant on these funds if we're doing that. And it tapers fairly quickly. I might try. I'm realizing like there's only 1 year of 9 million and 2 of 8, and then 1 of 7, and then 1 of 6, and then 2 of 5. It's not it just tapers. But this, every time it tapers, we're going to have decisions to make to fund fewer things on an ongoing basis. And I think we all recognize that. The other thing I wanted to just point out in terms of just doing due diligence over this recommendation, when we draw down quickly to a low available balance, that is when the timing of the settlement dollars coming in each year is very critical. Because if we only have $560,000, but we have $7 million in ongoing funding, we would just have to monitor that. I think probably should have tried to keep this above $1 million balance. I don't know if there's other thoughts on that, but just that we wouldn't want to have to not push out funding because we literally didn't have it available in our accounts because we're waiting on settlement payments coming in before doing that. Courtney, I think you had your hand up first.
I was just wondering, did you try any combinations where the drops were 0.5 million at a time instead of the whole million?
I did not, but that is, we can certainly do that.
10 to 9.5 to 8 point, 8. No, sorry, that would be 10 to 9.5 to 9 to 8.5, etc. I don't know if it works. Oh, there's like $60,000 in the bank in year 8.
Yeah, we're overdrawn by 2 million now, just doing it that way. I also selfishly didn't want to make trade-offs in the first couple of years. I wanted stable funding for the first 2 years, which is why I wanted this 10 million to be repeated in year 2. So we can, I think we probably will do 2-year contracts or whatever, whatever vehicle we're putting in place. So that was a consideration in my head as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if it worked, but looks like it doesn't.
Pat?
So here's my question, and I don't know whether it's too much in the weeds. When we look at this money and say, oh, this is the money we have to spend, but the administrative costs in running this isn't there. So is there a way that we can estimate administrative costs to pull that out of that? Because we know we have expenses in the Attorney General's office we pay for. We know we have Mary's salary. Again, is there a way to...
Oh, sorry, Pat.
So that was my one question. Second question is, I asked it before, is this money in interest-bearing accounts? And where's the interest going?
To answer the first question, I can send you the Secretary of State report. I report the administrative, what we have so far, which wasn't a lot last year for 2022. But once it's calculated for this year, I can pass it along to you guys.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to estimate that. Those are going to be de minimis. I think we're going to need to estimate something that we are going to have for ongoing funding.
Yeah, because we can't spend again, I don't want it to be a lot of money, but again.
I think just for this committee's awareness, I think this is obviously a very high level budget. I think we're looking at high level parameters of what we might want to spend each year based on the total funding. We're going to need a more detailed ledger-like account where we have actuals being accrued and other placeholders for contracts that we think we might want to put in place. And we're going to develop that. That'll be, in one column, it'll be programmatic costs or grant funds, and another it'll be admin costs. And we're just going to create rows of different cost centers and total that up. And I think that does make sense. Your guess is as good as mine. It could be $100,000. It could be $500,000 a year. It could be $1 million a year. So there will be fewer funds available for substantive purposes than what is on this sheet. Todd, I think you had your hand up for a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just kind of trying to follow up on what Courtney said. Part of the reason why I was talking about example D and moving things back around is it gives us more money in the longer term, but it probably doesn't matter. We'll be able to adjust the budget moving forward anyway, as we need to, as the council sees fit. So that's why I put my hand down. I guess I answered my question in my own mind.
Thanks for that. Any other discussion items? So so Pat, I just want to make sure I'm following up on your thought there. This includes the 3% set aside, includes admin costs in this. So we'll have fewer funds available. Are we comfortable? I think we can approve a budget basically and know that that's included in the top line, but then work to pull together a more granular sort of annual budget on a year-by-year basis here to make sure that we're capturing those different costs.
Yeah, I think you have enough for the council to say that this is the recommendation of the finance committee this is our recommendation as to how it's going to spread out. In adding in the one-time deal that, again, we know that we have admin costs, and as we start to filter and figure out what the percentages of that, we can do it. But this right now at least gives us the general overflow of each year, how much money we have. And then again, get into more of those weeds as to administrative costs. And again, if we determine that we're going to use an outside agency to submit grants, that adds to the admin cost of that. So yeah, I think
I agree. I just wanted to address the interest-bearing account. I've had preliminary discussions, and I emailed the controller's office, who would be in charge of such matters, just earlier this week, admittedly. But I need to sit down with them and figure out how we can, if we have the authority to do that, and how we would go about doing that. I think just to manage expectations, I will also just use 3% as which I cannot imagine we would get more than that, although interest rates are higher these days. It would be based on the available balance of our recommendation, right? Well, no, it'd actually be a little higher than that because we're not going to spend all 15 million instantly, but it would be, so it would be a little higher than these amounts. But we're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then probably in the tens of thousands of dollars each year for interest that would be generating off the cash that's sitting in the account. And it would maybe broach $1 million in the first year or so, depending on how quickly we move money out of the account. But I will follow up with additional thoughts on that by the powers that be. Courtney?
Well, my question was actually about the interest-bearing account. So now my question is, does it say anything in the MOU or in the legislation about interest being accrued to this account? Because again, my memory might not be good, but I feel like it's supposed to be in the LD that the money is, the interest account is accounted to.
Why don't I look that up and you guys continue and I'll answer in a minute.
Okay. The only other thing was I was gonna offer a motion to recommend this budget to the full council from the finance committee. I'm doing that. A
Comfortable with
motion to
that?
recommend.
I would
Do I hear
say,
a second?
What?
I'll second.
Is there, now you're gonna test my Robert's rules. Discussion on that motion? I think, I would just add that I think, I think this is a good, I like where we're at in terms of numbers on a page and a preliminary recommendation on, both first year and then out years. I think we might get questions by the council on whether or not, like, will we adjust? I think we're comfortable adjusting this as needed, but we would have to regroup to do that based on what the priorities are going to be, and when we see how much money is going to get divvied up between the priorities, basically. But I just wanted to say that, but it's fairly obvious.
Yeah, and I agree. And like nothing's set in stone, but we've got to start somewhere. We need a path to start walking down. So I'm offering this as a path to the council.
I love it. So there was a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Haley, do we have to do a roll call vote?
Yeah, I can do a roll call.
Take it away.
Todd Brackett,
yes,
Courtney Gary Allen,
Yes.
Pat Kimball,
Yes.
Ben Mann,
Yes.
Miles Olet,
Yes, my apologies for the sun in my eyes. Sorry, folks.
you're
But
good.
yes,
Paul Vinsel.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes.
Quickly before I forget, Brendan, under the Maine subdivision MOU, under section 4, under B, under number 3 is interest earned and other investment income on balances in the fund. So they stay within the fund.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I had found also, Pat.
Yeah.
I did do my homework. I really did read all the paperwork, y'all.
Except for the schools.
I know, I know.
I read it, Courtney, but I can't remember.
I saw it as less like important until we got there. No offense, schools that are listening. I think you are very important.
All right.
Just another observation, and this is more in the tactical, how things will play out over the next year as we start to distribute funding. But that $15 million that we just approved, that will come online not all at once, obviously, right? So some of that funding, by definition, either the contract's going to start partway through 24 and go partway through 25. So there's going to be, we're going to have a bunch of contracts and other agreements in place probably, or grants that are starting halfway through the year that, so we're going to have to, the annual budget will take all that into account, but it won't be as clean as we're doing $15 million in calendar year 2024, because some of those agreements probably won't start until, some will start hopefully in early calendar year 24, some will start later in calendar year 24, and they won't spend out in its entirety in like aligned to the calendar year, right? I think we covered. The only other thing I will send this around to this group, that spreadsheet, just so you all have it, and then we can make that recommendation to the full council. Brendan?
I was really raising my hand for Mary.
Sorry, I didn't raise it high enough. Ben, a quick question for you. After the Grants and Programs Committee meeting, Kim, who wasn't able to make it today, was wondering if you knew what the unit cost would be? Like for a single grant, was how she presented it. And I admit I don't totally understand what that question means.
I think the question was that, Ben, have you seen the priority sheet that Kim and Mary have made?
Mary sent it to me this morning. I looked at it, but I did not digest it entirely.
So if you could look at that and see if there's any way that you can project out the unit cost of things, That's, I think, what she's asking.
Yeah, I think what I hear the request being is sort of some sort of recommended amount for grants in each category, or how we might distribute the funds. I think the grants and recovery, I heard they're meeting again prior to the council meeting to come up with the how, not the what, or at least have some further discussion on that. Is that accurate?
Right.
They're meeting Wednesday before the council meeting, yeah.
Great. I will that would be helpful to have, and I can also give. I'm going to look at that spreadsheet and try to organize it and come up with maybe some recommendations on amounts. You know, I think, you know, like just as an example, it's going to be very activity specific, I think. So for the capacity building stuff, we're probably going to want to do a percentage of their total operating costs, which gets, we're going to have to collect like financial data to do that if we want to do it on that way. So that gets really complicated pretty quickly. But, you know, a large organization, lots of organizations are going to want capacity building, not just small ones. So we're gonna need to either segregate it to certain populations of organizations, but that's going to require a lot of work there, I think.
Yeah. And Ben, as you do it, I would suggest that you direct your questions to Kim and to Mary. If you have questions, you certainly can direct them to me, but probably Kim and Mary could probably answer that question for you much better.
But if there's ways I can support you in that too, please just let me know.
Thank you. Todd?
Maybe we've answered this question already, but or maybe Brendan, I don't know, but once the council has approved the budget, once we get the priorities from programs and grants, I mean, what do you see as a timeline as the soonest that some of this money might be able to go out? It's a question we all get almost on a daily basis. I've dodged it thus far.
We've dodged it a lot. I think the goal, if I understand right, of the grants and program committee really is that there's some programs that we think can be easily done and get the money out about quickly. There's some that's going to take a while, and when I'm talking a while, could be 3 to 4 months by the time you figure out a grant process and do it. But there's a couple things on that priority list that may be simple, and we may, cross your fingers, be able to do it in, I don't want to say I don't know, do it quickly. I don't want to say a number. But there are a few things. I'm thinking about the priority, the harm reduction piece about some of the flex funds. That may be easily be done because those programs are already established. They already have a relationship with the state. We know who the people are, and we may be able to get them their money quickly without a big complicated grant process or whatever. We may have an application process that will be easier, but that hopefully the committee will be able to determine that. But I think that we are definitely so much further along than we ever have been. But I think there's some that we may see go out quickly.
I think what I meant, Pat, I understand that's well said. And I understand that there's going to be some differences there. I just meant from a technical standpoint, is there anything else that will hold us up as far as once that process has been established or been agreed upon by the council? I'm assuming you could write a check right away.
I'm going to send around your financial disclosure forms that you have to fill out as part of the conflict of interest policy today with the meeting materials for the December meeting. Those do need to be filled out before money can get out the door. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
Well, I mean, I also think the how is really important, right? Like capacity building, every single provider that might do anything with opioid response is going to look for funding. So there needs to be a very specific, we're going to have to decide on the eligibility of who is eligible and post it. I think there's going to need to be a process for that. Otherwise, I think where there are going to be problems down the road with people not being aware of the funding availability or how it would be used. But I think I always come back to recovery centers, right? Like we have contracts with a lot of recovery centers at the state. So if we're leveraging existing contracts, that'll be easier than setting up a brand new process to get funding out for the first time.
That's absolutely correct.
Courtney?
Just super quick, two things. One, is in that email that you're sending out, Haley, is that gonna include the priorities document that's being discussed? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'm going to send out the results of the voting, and it is already posted on the website if you want to see it early. I'll send out the results of the voting, the agenda, a link to a Dropbox that Kim wants you to see that has some evidence-based practice, like resources for you to see what's evidence-based, I think. She's been collecting research. The conflict of interest financial disclosure form, and one other thing I think that I can't think of right now. But yes, to that.
And Mary and Haley, if you could do me a huge
Okay.
favor, make sure I don't
Okay, great.
forget to tell people about that financial disclosure at the meeting. To remind people
Will do.
with a verbal, yep.
Oh,
Just-
and the slate of officer nominations, that's the other thing I'm sending out, sorry.
Okay, second question, it might be a Pat question. Is this recommendation list deemed complete for now, or is that, like, is there any more discussion that's happening around it, or?
So I think when we discussed it at the grants committee or discussed it somewhere, I mean, this is the result of what we did at the last meeting. And so again, like anything else, things can get sideways. For now, this is our current list. And in conversation, if it gets changed, it gets changed. But again, if we keep changing it, we never move forward. And so at this point, I think we've had the discussion, we saw it, but we had the discussion how if I use harm reduction as an example, actually recovery supports. In the conversation, the largest vote getter was the recovery centers. But yet in the discussion, everyone sort of said, well, we really need recovery residents. Where is that priority? We need places for people with a roof over their head. So again, I think that for the sake of moving forward, we've had the conversation, but nothing's in stone. We just have to keep, it moving forward. I think for now, we're looking at, what the result was at that meeting. There's also the results of the public hearing. And we're trying to combine all of that in there. But for now, it sort of is where the direction we're going was after the vote of that meeting.
Okay,
I'm
and
only one- but I'm
maybe
only
this is
one
another
vote.
conversation. Yeah, maybe this is another conversation that needs its whole own, and I know we're over time. I just, not to make this complicated, but not the entire council voted for each individual thing. And I just, like the prevention thing, I'm not 100% on board for, I don't even know what it's called. The bark maybe is what it's called. I didn't vote for it, and I would prefer young people to get money first. But I'm also not going to throw complete stink about it. I just don't think that it's like completely set in stone yet, and that it deserves at least one more conversation at some point.
Yeah, I think it'll all have conversations. I don't think the conversation's over. It's just that we did the exercise and for the sake of moving forward. But we can have a conversation about that later. Ben, I think you had a request that someone present your financial data because you are going on a family vacation for the next meeting.
Yes, I'm going to literally be at the Portland Jetport at the same time of the council with my 3 kids. So I will not be able to attend or even call in. Apologies for that, but I will send around this spreadsheet. But is someone able to present the recommendation to the council and some of the discussion we had here today?
I can do that.
Thank you, Paul.
What day is that again?
What date's the council meeting?
Yeah, that's the
December 14th.
Yeah.
December what?
14.
Okay, just a heads up, folks, and Pat, while you're on here, I will also be on vacation that week. So I will not be there, just a heads up.
You will not be there the 14th either?
No, I will be out of the country.
Everyone's just leaving. Have a good time. That'll be fine. Thank you.
Okay, sorry for holding you all over a little bit. Any other items, either probably for a discussion later, not now, but happy to take those down.
Do you guys want to decide on your next meeting date while you're all here? Do you want to do that over email later?
We have our next meeting date.
Oh, do you? Oh, the 21st, is that what we're?
Yes, I would have to go back and look at it's on the body of the email that I sent a reminder this morning.
You did suggest the 21st, yeah, I wasn't sure if people had gotten back to you on that.
So we'll go
Yep.
with that. Do we need a motion to adjourn, or can I just adjourn the meeting?
You can just adjourn the meeting.
Fantastic. This meeting's over. Thanks, everyone. It was nice to see you all.
Thank you very much.
Everyone,
Good work today.
thank you.